Page 99, what we do agree on is that man is created imago Dei, in the image of God. And you'll notice we have broken out the basic Genesis passage. And we want to make a few observations on it as we move through it. As we start, I want us to note that image is not something man has. Image is what man is. All right? We are created in the image of God. For God to create man in His image means there's something in man more like God than anything else created. I would call it divine or derived majesty, or I might call it derived dignity. Dignity that we have of all of creation, only man is considered to be created in the image of God. We are more like God in some respect, some unknown respect. We're more like God than any other creation on the planet. And so that gives us majesty, derived majesty, not majesty from ourselves, but derived majesty, and that gives us dignity that is accorded only to humanity. Man is created in the image of God. Look at Genesis 1:26. Then God said, let us, keyword make, let us fashion or make man in our selem, or in our image, in our demut, in our likeness. On the left-hand side of the page, page 98, there's a box that says Insight from Hebrew Scriptures. Later, you can go and read a little synopsis on these two Hebrew words and what they might suggest about the image of God. We're back to page 99. Let us make man in our image, in our likeness. And, notice this, let them rule. So, there is a sense of there's a likeness coming, but also with that, connected to the image of God, there is a ruling or a dominion focus. Let them rule or have dominion over the fish of the sea. Now don't think for one moment that means that it belongs to us. It belongs to God, who is the Creator, but God can choose to have chosen administrators or viceroys who rule or reign in His place or according to His plan. And so that seems to be what's suggested here in verse 26. Verse 27 introduces a new concept. So God created man in His own, there's that word image, selem, in the image of God. He created him, and now here's the new introduction. Male and female, He created them. So maleness and femaleness seems to also be a part of the image of God. We're not sure how, but we'll look at that in a few moments. Verse 28. God blessed them, the image bearers, those created in the image of God. God blessed them, the image bearers, the male, the female, the man, the woman, and said to them, as a result of being in the image of God, number one, be fruitful and increase in number. That's probably one of the only few things we've ever done well in humanity. We know how to be fruitful and increase in number. Number two, fill the earth. And three, subdue the earth. And four, rule over the fish of the sea and so forth. So these three verses give us the working material, not enough material, but at least the working material to begin to fashion some concept of what is the image of God. Now, at this point, I want to give a tip of the hat to the Baptist theologian Millard Erickson. In that box, he makes an interesting observation, and one that I think practically we need to look at. The real human is not what we find in human society. The real human is the being that came from the hand of God, unspoiled by sin and the fall. In a very real sense, the only true human beings were Adam and Eve before the fall, and Jesus, who by the Holy Spirit overshadowing Mary was born a sinless human. Those are the only real people we've ever had. All the others are, and this is a description of us, folks, twisted, distorted, corrupted samples of humanity. It is therefore necessary to look at man in his original state. A key expression used in describing the original form of humanity is that God made man in His own image and likeness. Now, here's your practical implication. You want to know what a real man, and I'm talking about mankind generically, you want to know what a real man looks like? Look at Jesus. Look in the way that He thinks. Look at the way He responds. Look at the way that He lives. Look in the words that He speaks. If you want to know what true humanity, male and female humanity, is supposed to be like, look at Jesus. I think that's why it's always been interesting to me that when Philip kind of raises his hand in the upper room and he says, Jesus, if you'd just show us the Father, it'd be enough for us. And Jesus has to do that. What do you mean, Philip? Have you been with me so long and you still don't get it? He that has seen me has seen the Father. And so consequently, what we understand is we were created perfectly, innocently in the image of God in Adam and Eve, but we're no longer that. So turn the page. Before we get to what happened when sin entered into the world, let's give at least, in theology, I'm going to give you, of course, several options on what the image of God is. The substantive view. This view identifies, and here are the key words, particular quality or qualities. I'd underline those, like physicality or reason or spirituality. Subpoint 1. Some people have believed, it's been an extreme minority view, some people believe that that word selim, which can be used of an image or a statue, actually gives us the implication that we were created to physically resemble God. Now again, that's a minority view, that we physically resemble God in some way. Now, interestingly, Wayne Grudem, you may have heard of, who's a great Reformed theologian, Wayne Grudem has taken that concept and he says, no, don't think of it in crass physicality. This is what he says. He says there's a physical resemblance while still acknowledging that John 5:24 says God is spirit. But this is the way he says it. How can man have a physical resemblance to God when God is a spirit? And this is what Grudem says. Man has eyes to see. God sees without eyes. Man has ears to hear. God hears without ears. Man has mouth to speak. God speaks without a mouth. He's not saying that God has a physical body, but that our physical bodies in some way are reflecting the character and the fullness of who God is in the capacities of things that we can do. At least, so says Dr. Grudem. All right, let's look at the relational view. That's the image of God refers to, here's the key phrase, interpersonal relationships. Emil Brunner and Karl Barth were German theologians. Karl Barth was the guy who was trying to bring Christian theology out of liberalism back towards more biblical view. We call his whole system of thinking neo-orthodoxy, the new orthodoxy. He was still somewhat liberal and weak in some areas, but he was making us move back in the 20th century in the correct direction. He saw the image of God in the male-female interrelatedness, in the relational aspect. So for him, the image of God was the capacity for relationship. He would appeal to not only that Genesis 1:27, that in the image of God he created them, male and female he created. He would point to the Ten Commandments. And he would say, don't you notice that the Ten Commandments show that man's relational obligations to God vertically and horizontally to fellow man? For example, to God, we're to have no other gods before him. An example of horizontally to man, that we are not to steal from our brothers and sisters and so forth. And he would say, even the Ten Commandments shows relational capacity or vertical and horizontal dimensions, those kinds of things. Or even the Great Commandment, love God, love your neighbor as yourself. And so that would be his understanding of the image. The functional view is the image refers to the function we carry out, which would be the rule, have dominion over. That we are the representatives of God on the planet and that we are to rule in his place. In ancient times, the selim, the statue of a king, would be placed at his borders of his nation. Say there was a road leading to the capital city, and out there at the border, they would put a statue up like we have today. It would be, say, welcome to Arkansas, or something like that, and then there'd be a little roadside park and all that kind of stuff. Well, they would put a statue of the reigning king. that statue represented the authority, the sovereignty of the king to whom this road would lead to his capital or whatever it might be. And so under this view, the functional view is we're created in the image of God to be walking statues of God's sovereignty and dominion over His creation. That we are under His authority, and as under His authority, we are to represent Him in all respects and all aspects. That's the functional view. The Reformed view is a specialized form of the substantive view. They're very similar. The image of God is located in man, is seen in holiness, righteousness, knowledge of truth, and so forth. Let me just simply say, you might write in your notes, see page 102, because I have those 4 primary views in a chart form with the support and the problems of each of those views laid out for you on page 100, not 102, on page 100. Now, there is a 5th view. This is the view of Wayne Grudem. And this is, in fact, Wayne Grudem in his definition. I thought I'd written it down. Yeah, here he says that, not Wayne Grudem. Robert Cook says, man was created in the image of God and now is or represents God. And so consequently, it's a combination. The 5th view would be a combination of the substantive and the functional view. And frankly, I think that's where I would land the plane. Dr. Eugene Merrill, an Old Testament theologian at Dallas, would also suggest that possibly there is likeness, maybe moral likeness, maybe the capacity for rationality, the capacity for spirituality. All of that is being like God, but we also represent God. And so maybe you can't land the plane on one view or the other. Maybe it's a combination. Or as some people would say, we don't know what the image of God is, but it's real. It's actually there. In some ways, in some unfathomable ways, we are more similar to God, more like God, than any other aspect of creation. Now, let's turn the page because we have to move quickly. How has sin affected the image of God? Some say the fall only distorted but did not destroy the image. Now, some are going to say it destroyed the image. Some are going to say, and I believe correctly so, the fall only distorted but did not completely destroy the image of God. Genesis 9:6, for example. This is around the time of Noah. And we read, whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. Here's the reasoning. For in the image of God, God has made man. Now, this is already after man has fallen, right? This is post Adam and Eve. And so, for this to be said in the days of Noah is, if we had lost our image, you couldn't appeal to this as an argument. Because if you did, somebody would say, well, hey, that doesn't make sense. We lost the image. We're no longer in the image of God at all. But no, we're still appealing to the image of God in man, so therefore it can only be distorted or marred. Ladies, you know what happens to your silver. Every time you're going to have a big party, what do? You pull the silver down and you polish it because it gets tarnished. Well, in an even greater sense, because of the sin of Adam and Eve, all of us are born with tarnished silver, tarnished image. It's still there, but it's still tarnished. Now, time out. Let me tell you why that's important. You're driving down the road, you exit off the interstate, you're pulling up to the red light, you're going to make a turn left or right, and there's a bum over there holding up a homemade sign saying, I lost my job. And you are saying, I'm not giving you $1. Or are you saying, there is a creature created in the image of God? Distorted, marred, sullied, tarnished. So, Lord, what do you want me to do? Or you, somebody who just, there's somebody in your life, I don't know who they are, I hope it's not me, that just annoys the fool out of you. Okay, so maybe it is me. But there might be somebody in your life that they seem to be put there because they just absolutely bother you. They're created in the image of God. It's sullied, tarnished, marred, but that creature is in the image of God. Now, all of that's okay because we're all going, yes, we need to be less fortunate. We need to be concerned about them as being created in the image of God. Adolf Hitler, created in the image of God? And on and on and on it goes. We live in a world where what we have lost is not replaceable on our own efforts. But we live in a world where all of us are still carrying about in our bodies a little bit of the image of God. You have to look harder. You have to look more carefully. And sometimes you have to look with eyes of faith. But the image is in there. And that's why to truly practice your faith, you always practice good theology. Well, that was easy to say. That is incredibly difficult to live. All right, let's look at point B on page 103. Redemption begins the recovery of the image. Colossians 3:10. We put on the new self, which is, here's the key phrase, being renewed in the knowledge, in the image of the Creator. Or 2 Corinthians 3:18. We with unveiled faces all reflect the Lord's glory, or, here's the key phrase, being transformed into His likeness. Because He's never lost His image. And so we're being transformed into His likeness of the man from heaven. What is the practical significance of the image of God? That's point 4 at the bottom. And we just simply refer you, we'll not look at it right now, but to page 108. I've just given you some practical thoughts on being created in the image of God and how that applies to the believer.